I'd like to welcome you to the Summer Institute. And I just got a question, how long we have done the Summer Institute? 18 years. So from now on, we plan to go on. And we do have today guests sitting in. So it's not just you, but in the back, there is the German Soccer Association sitting in. And they're building an academy for the German Soccer Association. There's a good reason, since you know, since a few days. And, and they try to get the spirit of the research at the Max Planck into the German Soccer Association. The spirit being changing this association from a more hierarchical structure into one that is communicative, that's interdisciplinary, that's easy, that's about risk-taking, that's about getting projects that may fail, but that are high-risky, and also about error cultures. So talk about errors rather than hiding them. And so welcome to all of you. And so this is why they're sitting in. So that's, and if any one of you is interested in soccer, then please take your opportunity in the break and talk with those guys here. You see them, they're all guys. Okay, this is one of our applied projects. And it's not only about heuristics, which play a role in sports, so how to catch a ball. It's not done by utility maximization or by complicated calculations, but by very simple heuristics that are precise and can be executed in a second or so. But it's also about culture, how to organize science so that you have a good chance to have a breakthrough and also a good chance that you actually like what you're doing, that it's fun. And not just about publishing more papers and more papers and more papers, which is the wrong way to go. We don't need more papers. We need fewer papers and better papers. And we need also young people who dare to focus on great ideas and not just how can I get another paper in a top A or triple A things. So, but that's the part about courage. So what is the goal of the Summer Institute? It is, first, to familiarize you with interdisciplinarity. Many of you will have never been in a group where so many from other disciplines are. And I just mean those who are sitting here. So take the opportunity. If you are a psychologist, don't talk with the other psychologists. Take your chance, talk with the philosophers, the economists, and whomever, and vice versa. And so important ideas and innovation comes out often from that people get together and bring ideas together where you don't think that they might actually fit together. And it will not work out 10 times, but the 11th time. That will be your big breakthrough. And if you don't dare it, you're not getting it. So that's the first thing, interdisciplinarity. Take it serious and use it. And it's both ideas, it's also methodologies. There are many rituals in every field that people think they have to go through without thinking. And if you realize that others in another field have very different rituals that I've never thought about, that's the beginning of innovation. And so another important thing is that this Summer Institute is special for, and this is what the title here signifies. The title, I chose it by purpose, the heuristics revolution. We are not there, we are on the way. And this may be the center on our globe where we're trying to push it. It is very simple, and I will talk more about this today. We had the probabilistic revolution, that started in the mid-17th century. So the idea that you actually could tame part of uncertainty. And the part of uncertainty that has been tamed by probability theory is called risk. So calculable risk. That's what many of you, for instance, in neuroscience, the only thing you do. You have choices between gambles or other things where all the probabilities are known and everything is known. It's a totally certain world. This is what we will not talk very much in this summer institute. There are exceptions. So Michelle McDowell will talk about the work of the Harding Center for Risk Literacy in working with doctors and trying to teach doctors to understand probability and statistics. So that is risk. And that's important because most doctors have never learned to understand statistics, so ask your own doctor. And most likely, that person will not be able to read and understand a scientific article in her own field. Shall I repeat that? You will hear more about that. Yeah? This is part of our practical application. So the second major point is we use our results and research not only to publish, but also to change the world. And there will be a few talks here about boosting. There is a philosopher sitting here who will talk about boosting. So basically, this is a fashionable term that Ralph, I think, invented here, as opposed to nudging. So beat a fashionable term by another fashionable term. Yeah? You could also say risk literacy or risk savviness. Yeah? And so this is one part, to use the results and show that you actually can help people understanding how to make good decisions, rather than nudging them like sheep into what you think they should be. That's paternalism, that's not our philosophy. And we live in a world where we, given the immense increase of technology, we need people who understand the technology and can actually live with it rather than being controlled by that. So for instance, yesterday evening I had the wonderful opportunity to have a dinner with the members of the German Soccer Association. And I've been told one story, which I told my wife this morning, that you told me. I hope I get it right. If not, correct me. So, for those in the US, are there some of you here who don't know what soccer is? Oh, there are not too many Americans. So, there's a Champions League, which is the highest league, and there is an is this under 18 or 21? Sorry? Under 19. Okay, there's an under 19 group. So this means the younger one. And usually, in the final game, the team that wins goes back into the cabins where they have the things, and probably that's imagine they sing and shout and are happy. No longer. So the story I've been told, that the two teams, the winning team went back, and they were all sitting down quietly. Nobody was happy. Nobody was showing anything. Nobody was talking to the other one. They were just sitting there with their phones. Isn't it interesting? Totally changes. So it's one way how our minds are being changed by technology. And what's needed here is either we say that's where we want to go, we just live there, or all emotions are then emojis, and we don't even know how to read an emotion from another face. Rather we look here, but we know that emoji means that and that. So, and if you don't want that, then we need to do something, get the control back, get the remote control over our emotions back. So that's some of these themes. I hope I got the story right. If not, just ask them. That was, it's very interesting. I personally am very much interested how the technology changes us, and whether we want that. Okay, so the key today will be the heuristics revolution, and the idea being, again going back, there is one part of our world where probability theory works well to make decisions. But it's an amazingly small part. It's basically lotteries and choices between gambles. And that's why most people study choices between gambles and lotteries. There's a huge other part, which is called uncertainty, where the assumptions for probability theory are not met. So the assumptions meaning that you do not know the state space. So all future things that can happen and all the consequences, not to speak of the probabilities. And that's very typical. So I do not know what will happen this year at the Summer Institute, because I don't know you very well, and God knows, even if I knew you very well, there's the interaction between everyone, and this is more than a three-body problem, it's a multiple-body problem, and it's unpredictable. So how to deal with such a situation? Or for you, you're here and don't know exactly, should I have stayed home? Or will I learn something for my PhD, or do I just want to be entertained here? I will go on with my PhD thing anyhow, or so this is your kind of question. So here's uncertainty, what to do. And the key is that we need a different set of tools to make good decisions under uncertainty. And the tools we are investigating are so-called heuristics, rules of thumb. Heuristics have been always knew that animals and humans rely on heuristics. And heuristics, so Polya has, the mathematician, had made a division of labor between you need good heuristics to find a proof. And also good intuitions, they are related to that. But then, in order to check the proof, you need mathematics. So it's not a contradiction. It's not an opposition. And but we have, since the 1970s, a powerful program in psychology that also funded behavioral economics, where heuristics have been given a bad name, in general. Logic is always better. And that's the so-called Heuristics and Biases program that has been given 2 Nobel Prizes in economics. And this is not what we will hear here. So we want to take heuristics seriously and find out when they work and when they don't work, rather than saying heuristics are always bad. They are system one and it's something messy. And so the first thing is taking heuristics seriously. That implies taking uncertainty seriously. So uncertainty is nothing that you can deal with just with probability theory. The terms are usually confused in the attempt to reduce everything to risk. So that's basically the program. And what I will do today is I will mainly talk about questions. A revolution starts with finding different questions, not with finding different answers. And I will give you some answers too, but that's the key. What you see here is a quote from Herbert Simon. Herbert Simon was Mr. Interdisciplinarity, so he had influences in many disciplines, in political science. He got an economics Nobel Prize. He was one of the founders of AI. And this is his way how he defined the program, what he called bounded rationality. And note what he's saying. So he's saying, how do human beings reason? So he wants to know the process, not as if. So expected utility theory is not about how humans reason. It's only, we have this nice model and we predict the outcomes. That's black box. So he wants the process. How do human beings reason when the conditions for rationality postulated by the model of neoclassical economics are not met? So what are these conditions? Basically, that you know the entire state space of the future. You know what's going on in the future. And you know everything. Nothing unexpected can ever happen. Otherwise, you cannot have a probability distribution over that, where probabilities add up to 1. Even the twist with subjective probabilities don't help you here. So that's what the kind of definition of the program that we are trying to work out is about. Herbert Simon got some far, but he had his minds in so many different businesses. And so that's the spirit here. Many others have quoted Herbert Simon, and so the bounded rationality, the term was by economists used as optimization under constraints, which is not what he wants. You see it here. It is about where the assumptions don't hold. And or by, in the heuristics and biases program, it has become people's errors relative to Homo economicus again. So in Richard Thaler's idea, Homo economicus is God, and we are Homo Simpsons, because we deviate from that. That's not our perspective. In a world of uncertainty, there is no God. So nevertheless, we can make decisions. And that. So that's basically the overview. So we'll start. Are you ready? Then start. The important thing is, this is why I said yesterday about sleeplessnesses. If you profit from the Summer Institute, you will go home really disturbed. If you don't pay attention, you go home lucky and happy. So if you want to expose it to yourself, but you have to then rethink things and maybe have some disputes with some of your colleagues. So here is Herbert Simon. And here are 3 ideas. So these are 3 meanings where to cash out this idea of taking heuristics seriously. First, we distinguish between risk and uncertainty. So a situation of risk is like lottery is the classical example. Yeah? You know everything. That's unless someone cheats you, everything is clear, every possible outcome. Or choices between gambles, the usual thing. Would you rather have 100 euro for sure, or a 50% chance of getting 200, otherwise nothing? That's, everything is sure, nothing surprising can be happening. So it's like playing in a casino, playing the roulette. That's the world of risk. The problem is that there's not many worlds of risk. Even a casino a casino can calculate the risk on the roulette table and hedge it. So, yeah. But as Nassim Taleb in one of his books wrote, the major losses of a major Las Vegas casino occurred by unexpected events. So one of the unsatisfied customers dynamited the casino. The daughter of the owner was, he had to pay ransom to get her back, and a lot of things that you don't think of. Yeah. So, uncertainty. And of course, there are many degrees. Some things you can calculate, other things you cannot. Yeah? So that shouldn't be read as a dichotomy. Like in the casino, you can calculate something. And that's important because many economists reduce all uncertainty to risk, or they claim they could use that. A good heuristic, in this case, if in a debate, ask the economist, who is usually male, how did you choose your wife? Then it's becoming clear that you cannot know the space race and cannot know the utility calculation. I only found a single economist in all of my life who claimed that he applied his own theory on that. So they made a list of all women that I didn't ask how many, and then he get all the consequences that he could think of, whether she will take care of the children. This was one of the things, was she will let me work in peace. Then he estimated probabilities for each of these women that this will actually happen, multiplied the probabilities by the utilities he made up, and I made a calculation, and then I made an offer to the wife, to the person with the highest expected utility. Yeah, now they're divorced, but that happens to many. So that's here. The second major distinction is between process models and as-if models. So this is maybe, it's also a distinction that is, can be very clear, and there are also grades in between. So a process model, what Herbert Simon wants, tries to model the actual process of decision making. So when you make a decision, and you can see this, to whom are you going to talk in the break? And some people have some plan, others just randomly let it happen, and that's being modeled. An as-if model does not model the process of decision, only the outcome. So expected utility theory is an as-if model by economists' own account. Prospect theory is an as-if model. It doesn't mean that these are the processes, these complicated calculations. And if you divide up your money, if you invest your money and divide it equally on the assets you have, that's a process model, because it tells you what to do. Heuristics are generally process models. And the as-if models are not only in economics, but also in psychology, very popular. Why? Because one takes a convenient statistical model, such as Bayes or expected utility calculation, and project it into the mind. And if you say, oh, there's no evidence that all these calculations would be done, yeah, then it's just as if. So Milton Friedman has an old statement against psychology. So to keep the psychologists out, we don't care about the assumptions. We don't care, that we just want to have peace and have our models. There are a few philosophers in, it's also tradition in philosophy, keep the psychologists out. We want to keep them in. And part of the way we do research is to take people, particular people who know something, experts, and analyze what they are doing and make models of that and start from here. And then go into rationality and investigate whether that's a good thing, what they're doing, and in what situation. Rather than starting with your own belief that God knows expected utility or Bayes or whatever, or the axioms, would be incorporated rationality with no evidence, just strong beliefs. And so this is, in philosophy, sometimes called a sin. So going from is to ought. But it's a heuristics for doing interesting research. And I don't see the point why one should believe someone who makes up some axioms and says this is rationality. I rather study how good experts, be they experts in sports or in science or otherwise, how they actually make decisions. So that's the other way. That forces you to leave your laboratory, something that not everyone wants, and actually deal with doctors, for instance, or lawyers. And I've trained about 1,000 doctors myself in continuing education, or also in the US, federal judges and lawyers. And that makes also your life more interesting. Okay, second distinction, process model, not as-if model. And the third one is maybe the more difficult from that. So traditionally, rationality is often defined in logical axiomatic terms like transitivity or independence, or you can find an entire list of logical rules from whom people deviate. And then the conclusion is, if you deviate from these rules, the rules are totally without content. If you deviate, then it's a so-called error, bias, cognitive illusion. in my opinion, that itself is an error, because you need to analyze whether a certain rule works in a certain situation, not just declare every deviation. So you find in popular textbooks all these so-called cognitive illusions. Don't believe in this. Many of these so-called cognitive illusions are totally intelligent judgments. They're just mistaken as illusions by people who believe in logical rationality. So Wikipedia has about 175 of these illusions, mostly to a large degree logical deviations. If you would think logically all your life, you would understand very little. What a computer program can do very well is think logical. And that's why it's not very intelligent. So if I say, this evening I invite friends and colleagues, the end is not a logical end. Because you know I don't mean the intersection. I mean the union. This is a logical or. Have you committed an error? The error is so-called conjunction fallacy. You may have known of that. No, of course. Because you're more intelligent. You make invited inferences about language. This is not an error. So that's just an example for that. So we study ecological rationality. That means the question, can we identify the situation where a certain heuristic works and works better than so-called complex models? So that's the key idea of ecological rationality. But then you need to study the environment. And that's the title of the Summer Institute, Strategies. Heuristics is a subset of those, and environment, and how they fit together. That is also, Herbert Simon expressed this in the metaphor of the pair of scissors. Okay? So that's the three big challenges. And just think about your own research, how this maps in this. Most likely, those of you who do kind of decision-making use problems of risk, most likely, no? They use as-if models and look at internal consistency or something like that. And if that's the case, that's wonderful, because that keeps you thinking about what you're studying. Okay, so that's the distinction that I've already talked about between risk and uncertainty. The interesting thing is that these toy problems of choices between gambles, they result in highly complex models like cumulative prospect theory. On the other hand, if you go in the real world and have complex problems, usually you find that people solve that with simple heuristics. So again, in a world which is totally well-defined and clear, like lotteries, you can fine-tune, and that results in mostly complex models. And that's also correct. Yeah? If the world is stable, then you fine-tune. Then you model every drop of that's coming down. Yeah? But in a world that is changing, that's volatile, where there's interaction, then you need to scale back and look for robust strategies. The term optimization, in the sense of finding the best and only the best answer, has a meaning in a world of risk. It has no meaning in a world of uncertainty. By definition, you can't find it. If you don't know the entire state phase, you cannot find it. You need to find something else, something that's likely to survive in many future situations, that's robust. Okay, that's basically the distinction here. The distinction between risk and uncertainty goes back at least to Frank Knight, an economist, who wrote a book called Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit, claiming that if we would live in a world of risk where everyone knows everyone, things like in a game theoretic situation where you know what the other one, everyone knows the rules, nobody could make any profit. Profit of an entrepreneur comes out that the entrepreneur faces situations of uncertainty and has courage and guts to go into it and take risks in a different sense of the word. Okay. The program of research we are doing has 3 types of questions. The first is the question about the so-called adaptive toolbox. So that's on the individual level, that's what you have in your mind, a repertoire, how to deal with other people, how to deal with world, with all kinds of problems. And so this is a descriptive part of the program. So find out what these heuristics are and describe them at best at a formal level, because we want to avoid. So you can see this program as a development of the old heuristics and biases program, but the heuristics were never formalized. You never could test them. Availability or notions like system 1, you can just throw up your hands. Huh? That after the fact can explain everything, cannot predict anything. Huh? So we need precise things. A heuristic like imitate what the others do, or the majority, has at least some precision. You can start to model that. And so that's the first type of program. And a heuristic exploits. A heuristic can be decomposed in building blocks, like search rules. Peter will talk about search, stopping rules, and decision rules. And also, it is usually based in evolved capacities that we have that are needed that the heuristics can be simple. So the capacity for imitation, we don't know exactly where it is located or where it is, but we have it. Other animals don't have it in this way. A child imitates more precisely and more generally than any other species. And that's a precondition for some of the heuristics. So the second question is different. It's a normative question. It's about how we should think or how we should build instruments that can help to make better decisions. So this is new, because in the classical view of heuristics and biases program, it never emerges, because the heuristic is always associated with a bias. So what you ought to do, no heuristic. Just think logically. That's the idea. What we have shown is, and that's one of our first major contributions, that there are situations where if you make it simpler, a simple heuristic can outperform, not just being faster and more efficient, but also more accurate than complex rules. So that you, with a subset of information, you get farther than another one, which is very counterintuitive. And that's part of this, to work that out when this happens. And the third part is about intuitive design. That means, can we use all this knowledge about, from the first two, to design expert systems or other systems that are efficient and intuitive. Intuitive means understandable. They're transparent. And simplicity is a way to go there. For instance, there is now an emerging discussion in machine learning about understandable AI, understandable machine learning, because what do you do if a neural network and you don't know what it does? And it's a particular problem if these models are used for important decisions, like in credit scoring, or in the COMPAS algorithm about predictions. You stand trial, you're the defendant, and there's an algorithm that calculates that you have an 80% chance of committing another crime in the next 2 years. I'm the judge, I'm probability blind, I don't know what that means, and nobody knows where this number comes from. So I may use it, and you get, instead of 2 years, 4 years. And this is not understandable, AI. And in that particular case, it has been shown now that a very simple heuristic, which just looks at 2 features, is as good or better than this complicated COMPASS algorithm that looks at 137 features and other things together. It's another case where in machine learning, there is a growing awareness that more is not always better. A very simple heuristic can outperform complex thing. In this case, you just look at two variables to find out the chances that he is doing another crime, which is age and number of previous conviction. That's all. And that has been known by experts a long time ago. And the key problem is, if you have this complicated, non-transparent machine learning system, and people believe they must be good, or police believe, and then the experts lose their good intuitions. And that's a consequence of that. And here, heuristics help. If you understand, it's just the best I can do is age and number of convictions. Very simple and transparent. And it's also a value judgment that we are going into a society where, at the moment, more and more things, decisions about us, are non-transparent. Do we want that? If you don't want it, then studying intelligent heuristic is one way out of that. Okay. We also stick, what's also very, there are three methodological principles that I mention because they are not always followed. The first is, you need formal models of heuristics, not some kind of vague words like availability, representativeness, or system one. Otherwise, you cannot really make, this is not science. So that you can test. And second, when testing, we need competitive testing. Competitive testing means that you're not just testing your own model, and it's significant, and you claim victory, but you test your own model against the best competitors that already exist. In the COMPASS situation, you test COMPASS against what judges already can do, or the police already can do. That's the question. These comparisons are often avoided. It's like the pharmaceutical industry tests there, and it's still the case, tests their new products against a null hypothesis of zero, instead of the best competitors. You, as a patient, you want a new medicine that is better than what's there, not something that's just better than chance, and maybe worse than what already exists and marketed to you. So that's competitive testing. You might do an exercise and look into your own journals in your field, empirical articles where some model is being tested, and see how often this is competitive testing or just null hypothesis testing. Null hypothesis testing means you test against, chance. And do a count, and you have a nice paper and publish it. And you have a good chance in most fields, machine learning excluded, that you get a high number of violations of each of these principles. And the third one is tests of predictive power as opposed to hindsight. So if you calculate a logistic regression and want to predict, if you would be a sociologist, you might predict inequality. And you have 17 variables. What do? You calculate the logistic regression and do your beta weights and maybe discard those who are not significant. Is this a model test? No. It is hindsight. You had the data already. And you test your model, the logistic regression on that. So prediction means you predict something that's in the future or at least not known to you. And this is another paper you might write in your own field and look how often models are tested in hindsight. So the data is already there. Why is this a problem? It's a problem because hindsight is easy. And you will always find a great fit, hindsight, if you have many free parameters. If you have the more free parameters you have, the better the fit will be, in general. That's not what you want to have. You need to predict. And so these are some of these principles. Okay, let me just go now a little bit quicker through a few things. These are some of the heuristics in the adaptive toolbox. Some of these will be dealt with today, not today, in these days. And if you want my PowerPoint, and you just let me know. It's on this computer, and everything is shared here, transparency. Here's one example, how to predict customer behavior. This example goes the same way as I said before. You start, and in this case, interview experienced managers and find out what they do. And then you model this heuristic and test it with real data in prediction and competitively. Okay? So the situation is, assume you have a huge business and with a customer with about 100,000 customers, and your question is, who will buy again? So you want to send targeted information and find out, and don't waste your time with customers who are fed up with you and will never buy with you. So a typical way to approach this is not to find out what people actually do, but come up with some fancy-looking model. And this is one example of one of the major models in marketing. And you don't have to understand it, you just should be impressed. And it has enough free parameters so it can, after the fact, fit well. The other way is you start with analyzing what actual managers do. And then in this study, it was found that managers in 3 very different businesses use basically the same heuristic that can be formalized as, if a customer has not purchased within 9 months, classify as inactive, otherwise of active. It's a one-reason heuristic. And it's a model because they will not exactly wait 9 months, always, unless you program it. So, and the hiatus might be different. So, this is a heuristic. The other one is not a heuristic. And you also see the different way to get to this heuristic. And then you go another step. No, if you would be in the classical way to think about heuristic as bias, you would say, oh, they do this because they have cognitive limited abilities, or they manage or have no time, or whatever. We would make up some story about it. But you need to go one step further and now test how good this is compared to, in this case, one of the best competitors. And not in data fitting, but in data fitting, the Pareto negative binomial distribution model that you just saw will win, of course, because it has lots of free parameters, can fit the data. And as you know, John von Neumann once said famously, I can fit an elephant with 5 parameters, and Wrigley's tail with 6. This is not what science is about. Science is about making good predictions in this case. And here's the result. So what do you think intuitively? The heuristic has only one good reason. The Pareto negative binomial distribution has this reason and everything else, many more. And there's lots of fancy calculations. Now we test how well it predicts customer behavior. Could it ever be that the simple model is as good as the complex one? By usual standards, no. At least the argument is because it uses less information and so on. Yeah? But now we are in a situation of uncertainty. This is high uncertainty. It's not a lottery. It's high uncertainty. And we are doing actual prediction. And that was the first results in that group. What you see here is correct predictions. That's the heuristic. This is Pareto. That's an airline. And this is actual data. So it has 74%. And with make it simpler, you get 77. In the apparel business, the complex model does 75. Make it simpler, you get 83, the heuristic. The heuristic that actually the managers use. And here in this is an internet business, it's equal, you just save all the effort that you need for doing this calculation. Well, that's an illustration. This has now been done, Florian Artinger has now some 20 more of these businesses that do this, and with basically the same results. These results should not happen if it would be true that there's a trade-off between simplicity and accuracy. That's the usual story about heuristics. Because according to this story, why do people use heuristic? Because they save effort and they have to pay a price. This trade-off is not true under uncertainty. It may sometimes happen, it may not happen. We need to rethink the entire story about heuristics. Then I make a short contribution to ecological rationality. And so this is the usual story about the accuracy effort trade-off. Heuristics are used because people sacrifice a little bit of accuracy to get it faster done. Which is, you find this in Payne, Bettman, and Johnson, who have formal models. You find it also in Kahneman, who has no formal models, has claims. And that's the underlying mathematical structure. And that trade-off is not true under uncertainty. That is in most of our situations. And the real trade-off is the so-called bias-variance trade-off, which I'll only explain quickly in a picture. So you have two dartboards, and the player on the left side, this is a dart, that's a dart, has a systematic bias. He or she is throwing too far to the right and down, but has a low variance. So the bias is the distance from the average dart, that in statistical theory would be the average mean of a sample, to the true value, and the variance is the variability around the average dart. See that? So the hiatus heuristic, that with no free parameter, would have no variability at all. It will always hit at the same thing because it discards all data. It's the opposite of big data. But it will likely have a bias. And you see the trade-off here. Here is a player who has zero bias. So on average, it's in the bullseye, but has lots of variance. And if you count the rings, and if that's the criterion, you know that a smart mind can do better with a systematic bias than without no bias. And the real question is how much variability is being created. And you create lots of variability by introducing more flexibility, by more parameters and smaller samples. That's an intuitive way to understand that how less can be more. And and here are just one example about classical misconceptions about heuristics. And lexicographic heuristics are heuristics that ask one reason, and if that doesn't lead to a result, they ask another one, so they don't add up and integrate. They are inconsistent with the existence of a utility function, and this is the real reason why they're called irrational. But who cares about whether you have a utility function or not, if you make better decisions? And that's the kind of rethinking. And so that was the wisdom, and it's still, among many groups, the wisdom. And we have shown that using this bias variance decomposition, that there are three reasons in the environment that determine the bias. And if any of these holds, then a very simple heuristic has exactly the same bias as any linear model. I'm not going into details. I should just show this as a way to understand how one can derive mathematical results from ecological rationality to show conditions under which no linear model can outperform a very simple heuristic that just goes with one reason. And you will find the details in what you read. Let me just go there. So these are several. We had here lexicographic heuristic. These are several ways to make things simple, or start simple, and achieve as good result or better results than complex models. You can just introduce equal weights. Forget about your regression weights. Make everything equal. Most of you would not dare to do it. Just do it and see. You reduce variability. And if the bias component is not high, it's there. Or just go with one reason. That's the hiatus heuristic or lexicographic. And the last thing I will do is about intuitive design. And so this is now use these results and help experts outside make better decisions. So the results, it's called intuitive because by analyzing, by asking the adaptive toolbox question, you get how the way people think, at least you model it. Yeah? And you use this way to design expert things, and it comes natural to them. So a logistic regression is not intuitive for most of us. Or, not to speak about a neural network. We don't understand this. We are looking at expert systems that are intuitive in the sense they're transparent. You can memorize them, ideally. If you're in an emergency situation, you're not going to look your computer up. And also modify it according to your own knowledge, that it's in your control. Here is the, I briefly mentioned the story about COMPAS recidivism predictions. And there's an article today that shows that a very simple intuitive algorithm can match and outperform this complex thing. The same has been shown for Google flu trends. Remember that Google wanted to show its relevance for in healthcare. Healthcare is a big market. Everyone wants to go in. That's the reason. And tried something reasonable, namely to predict the spread of flu in the US and other countries. And the idea was to predict it faster than the CDC. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control. And it seemed to work for a little time, but then it totally broke down. And among others, because the algorithm, which was based on millions of search terms, cannot think. So it cannot distinguish whether you put in search terms relevant for flu because you have symptoms or because you are curious about swine flu, for instance. And that it overestimates that was one of the reasons. So finally, it was buried. And it was shown that a very simple algorithm that just uses 3 variables can do as well or better than the entire complex big data analysis. The algorithm is, you take the criterion in Google Flu Trends is you predict the number of flu-related doctor visits in a certain region. And the algorithm is, you take the, so one doesn't know last week's doctor visits, but the CDC knows the visits 2 weeks ago. You take that number, you take the visits 3 weeks ago, and for the visits last week, you take the one last year's same week. Just take these 3 numbers. That's it. You don't need any of this big data analysis. And the data is, I think it's available. You can just do it yourself. Here's again, why is this possible? It's a huge uncertainty, the spread of flu. Google had an algorithm, linear algorithm with some 45 variables. Secret, we don't know what they are. The transparency issue. And a very simple algorithm that is totally open and everyone can check. can easily match what I did. So that gives you some ideas why simple heuristics can not only be as accurate as complex big data algorithms, but only there is transparency in it. And it's an important value in our times, where we are guided more and more by credit scoring, and you don't get an apartment, you have no idea why you have this bad score. And you will not find out, because it's protected. It's a secret. So, this is an example of a fast and frugal tree for predicting heart attacks. I will not go into details. You will learn about fast and frugal trees and constructing them. It's just, you get the basic idea. Only 3 questions are asked. It's lexicographic. Every question can lead to an action, an output, or go on. And this is a heuristic design. Doctors can memorize that immediately and apply that. And also change them if patients change. So, this is an example about our work with the Bank of England on how to make the world of finance safer. And those of you who are in finance know that the regulators have rules like Basel III that are highly, that imply highly complicated value at risk calculations. So if you are not in this field, here's a simple way to understand what's going on. If you have if you own nobody owns a bank anymore. So if you are an executive in a large bank, like the Deutsche Bank, to calculate your value at risk, that tells you, so the capital you need to hold, for instance, to survive in 990 out of 1,000 times. To calculate this value, you need to estimate thousands of risk parameters. They're all in the future. And they are dependent. That is the domino problem. So that means a correlation matrix in the order of millions. Good luck. And that's all done with data that does not include the last crisis. That's the so-called Turkey problem. That's, and the idea is, and it's not only, there's no evidence that these complicated calculations actually predict. And we know that they have not predicted any crisis. But it's also totally intransparent. And the banks can use their internal models and fumble around. And the regulators have no way to control that, really. So that's the alternative, to make a regulation system that's transparent. And here is we have used the same tree, same kind of tree, fast and frugal tree, for banking regulation. And I'm not going into details, but what you can see, it's transparent. It just asks 3 questions. And that's a model that we try to push together with the Bank of England but it also has high resistance because the banks don't want to be transparent and want to make the noise that their complicated algorithm is good. And the idea that complex problems need to be solved by complex solutions is particularly present in the banking system. For instance, Basel I, so the first regulatory framework, was about 30 pages. Basel II was over 300. Basel III over 600. And wait, if we not succeed, Basel IV will be over 1,100, and nobody understands these things. So when I started working with the Bank of England economists, including their chief economist, I asked them, who of you understands the consequences of Basel III? It was not a soul, nobody. Why are you doing it? Complex problems need complex solutions, and that's the alternative. So I skipped the theory integration problem and end with 3 misconceptions. Heuristics produce second-best results. Optimization is always better. You'll find this in all textbooks. particularly behavioral economics, much of social psychology, and we'll try to change that, to take heuristics seriously. Complex problems need complex solutions. Sometimes, sometimes not. And we need to find out the difference. So if you're in a world that's highly stable, then fine-tune. Get complex solutions, but otherwise not. And more time, information, computation is always better. So at the end, there was once a probabilistic revolution from the mid-17th century till today. It has revolutionized science. And if you want to know about that, here are 2 books that I've been part of. And it's a very interesting way, part of enlightenment to get it in. But it has been overdone. People think they can model everything with one tool. And we need, together with the probabilistic revolution, a heuristic revolution to take uncertainty seriously and think and investigate how people actually solve all these problems that apparently cannot be solved. And heuristics are one major tool. So here are 4 key messages. So distinguish risk from uncertainty. And the best decision under risk is not the best under uncertainty. That means if you do, as a neuroscientist or as a just behavioral scientist, choices between gambles and find that some people are risk averse, other ones not, there's no reason to assume that would generalize to the real world of uncertainty. Why don't you study the real world of uncertainty directly? Give people problems where the entire state space is not known and see how they deal with it. Second, the adaptive toolbox is the descriptive science. What's in your mind, or what is in the repertoire of an institution? What's in the mind of a Donald Trump? Probably not so difficult problem to work out. And the building blocks, the search rules, stopping rules, the decision rules. And ecological rationality, so to realize that the old story that we use heuristics because we save some effort and pay some price for accuracy is not true. The mind can have it both ways, to be more accurate and faster with less information. And that gives you also a new version on the so-called cognitive illusions. Many of them are actually forms of intelligence mistake as illusions. And finally, and very important, stick to the scientific principles. Commit to formal models, commit to competitive testing rather than just your pet model, and also to, if you make prediction of the future. Don't just do data fitting. So, this is the framework of much what you will hear during this time. And we have now time for some questions. And thank you for your attention.